Dr. Hardy, which branch of service did you serve in?
I served proudly in the United States Army.
And what years did you serve?
I served initially from 1966 until 1971 as an infantry officer. And then after I came back from Vietnam, I went to medical school and re-entered in 1980 as a physician, as a medical corps officer, and got out, retired in 1998.
Great. So what was your military occupation, and I have what was your military occupation designation / specialty, basically his job?
Well, I had two of them. My initial MOS, although officers really don't have that, was 71542, which was Airborne Infantry Officer. And add on to that I was an Army Ranger. And then after that, I was a 61 Hotel, which is a family practice physician. So I have two lives in the Army, one as a line officer and one as a physician.
Great. And what years did you serve in Vietnam, and what units or division did you serve with?
I left for Vietnam the day after Christmas, 1967, and I had really two tours of there, a tour and a half, and came back in July of 1969. I was assigned to Advisory Team 90, which was in Tay Ninh Province in the Republic of Vietnam. It's about 100 kilometers northwest of Saigon, and War Zone C was located in Tay Ninh Province, and it was one of the places where if you wanted to fight, you could always get one.
Oh, great. And then, we have the next question. You have, where did you serve in Vietnam? We can follow that up. So where did you serve in Vietnam? Was there any other areas, or did you pretty much stay in that?
No, I was assigned to Advisory Team 90 my entire time. Tay Ninh Province is big, and I was on a mobile advisory team. We moved all around the province every 60 days or so, taking M16s and M60 machine guns to the Vietnamese. I was with the Vietnamese Army. I wasn't with the Americans. There were just 5 of us on the team. And when I got there, the Vietnamese had old World War II weapons. They had M1 carbines, M1s, BARs from World War I, really. Old 30 caliber machine guns, things that you see today in a museum, but that's what they had to fight with. And they really weren't any match for the North Vietnamese Army armed with the AK-47. So the idea was the American advisors would take a plane load of weapons to a Vietnamese unit, gather up their old stuff, and then spend really 2 months teaching them how to use these weapons, how to use the mortars, take them out on patrols. And the Vietnamese got a lot of confidence when they had weapons, one, that would work, and two, that would deliver an overwhelming amount of firepower. So it really transformed these small units that we went to.
Wow, that's fascinating. Okay, and next question is, what is your last memory of Vietnam?
It's funny, I talked to a group yesterday about that. At the end of my second tour, I got on that plane in Saigon, and it took off and banked. And when I looked out on the jungle and on the rivers down there, I said to myself, I am never going to complain about anything as long as I live, and I'm going to take time every day to appreciate the mere fact that I'm alive. And I've done pretty good at both those. Every morning when I come to work here at the VA, I get here early, and I get out of my car and I just stop for a minute and look around. I look around at the hospital. I look around at this beautiful campus, at all these old buildings. In the summertime, the sun is coming up. I take a minute to look at that, and I just sort of revel in the mere fact that I'm alive. And Vietnam really is the reason for that. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be as attuned to the fact every morning that I'm alive.
All right, that's great. Okay, and so the next question has, if you were to return to Vietnam, would there be questions you would have that you would want to talk, that you would ask of the Vietnamese people, be they citizens, soldiers you served with, maybe the enemy you fought against? If yes, what are some of these questions? So if you're going back to Vietnam, what would you ask the people there if you had the opportunity to discuss your experience?
You know, unlike most Americans who served with American units and really had no contact with the Vietnamese other than prostitutes and people selling them stuff on the black market, I lived, ate, fought, slept with the Vietnamese my whole time I was in Vietnam. I rarely saw an American unit, and if I did, honestly, more often than not, I was embarrassed by how they acted. You know, frankly, most American soldiers, in my experience, have a lot of disdain for the Vietnamese. They didn't think the Army fought very well. They didn't think if they did fight well that the Americans would have to be there. And the fact that Vietnam collapsed after the Americans left is proof in the minds of most American soldiers. It validates their feelings about the Vietnamese. Because of all the time I spent with them, I have a very different view, I think, of the Vietnamese and the Vietnamese culture. The Army, in all of its wisdom, sent me to school. They sent me to special warfare school before I went to Vietnam to learn how to speak Vietnamese and to learn the history and the culture of the country. So as a 22-year-old lieutenant, I was probably about as prepared for what I was going to do as an advisor as you could be. Most Americans just got on a plane and went over there and got to American base camp, and the next thing I knew, they were in the jungle fighting and really never had a chance to appreciate the countryside. The Vietnamese have a long and really beautiful history, and as a people, they're kind and gentle, very industrious, very family-oriented, and I will go back to Vietnam. I suspect that most of the people I served with are dead, either shot outright when the North Vietnamese came in, the officers and people I worked with. The enlisted people were probably put into prison camps to get re-educated. Most of them spent a decade in there. Really, it was slave labor for the most part. So I doubt that there'll be many of the people that I served with still alive over there. I would ask. I have the names of the Vietnamese I served with, and when I got there, I would try to find them if they were still living. So the first thing I would do is I'd try and find some of the men I served with. I'd also like to go back to the places that I served in. You can get on Google Maps and get like a 10,000-foot view of anything, and I have flown over the area that I served in Vietnam. And I have that 1/50,000 map on the wall, and in the center of it is a mountain called Nui Ba Dinh. It was an extinct volcano, and while I was there, every time we went there, we got into a battle. Every time. It was just inevitable. If you got close to the mountain, you were going to get into it. Today, there's a gondola that goes up to the top of that mountain, like in a ski resort. And on the top of the mountain, there is a memorial, really, to the revolution, to what we fought against in Vietnam. So if I went back, I would love to take that gondola ride up to the top of the mountain and remember some of the things that happened. One of the things that comes to mind is we had an operation there one night on the side of the mountain, and we heard what we thought were some enemy soldiers, so we fired some artillery. And the next day we went down and we found a bunch of dead North Vietnamese soldiers. And I was with the Vietnamese unit, and so I had an interpreter, and he found what was really a Ziploc bag with a diary in it. And he took it out, and we sat there on the side of this mountain, and he read from this soldier's diary to me. This is a diary of this man who had walked from North Vietnam down the Ho Chi Minh Trail to that very spot where he was killed that night by artillery. And in the book were 2 pictures of American girls, like the kind you get in a yearbook, those little, like 1.5 by 1.5 black and white square pictures that he had taken off the bodies of Americans. And there was a picture of his family in there as well. And the diary was fascinating because it talked about coming down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, about B-52 bombers, about a tiger eating somebody, about not having enough food, about people getting malaria. I mean, it was just this unbelievable story. And I thought somewhere all those diaries exist. If you could get those, what a great book that would make. And one of my great memories of Vietnam was just sitting there and having the enemy humanized. You know, it would be a great story about Tom Hardy coming from America to this point, and this guy, you know, coming down in this collision we had that night on the side of the mountain. So maybe when I die, I'll write a screenplay about that, you know, before I die.
That's fascinating. And you mentioned some of this, the locations. I see Robert here has it's a separate thing. So if there's any other locations you can think of that would we need to visit, he has. Are there locations you would want to visit in Vietnam, given the choice to travel? As that's what he has as his final.
Yeah, I actually didn't see much of Vietnam. I mean, I was in one big province right on the Cambodian border. So I'd like to go to the highlands of Vietnam. Vietnam is mountainous. There's a mountain range, not quite as high as the Rockies, that runs the entire length of the country. The coastal plain is flat, but when you get inland, not very far, there are some beautiful jungle-covered mountains. And there is a place called Dalat, D-A-L-A-T, that while I was there had what is the equivalent of West Point for the South Vietnamese Army. The South Vietnamese Army Military Academy was there, and it's supposed to be a beautiful place. When the French were there, it was a resort for the wealthy French to go there. So I'd like to go to Dalat, and I'd also like to go to Hanoi. I mean, I really would like to walk the streets of Hanoi. There is the remains of a B-52 bomber sticking out of a lake in the middle of Hanoi. I'd like to go there. I'd like to go to what they call their War Crimes Museum to see a little bit of how the North Vietnamese view the war. And then there's a beautiful harbor off the coast of North Vietnam that I would like to go to. There's also an embassy, an American embassy, a full embassy in Hanoi. And a couple of years ago I met some Vietnamese officers who were here in America, and they gave me their business card, and they said if I ever came to Vietnam, if I went to the embassy could find them, and they would like to take me around in Hanoi. So I have that business card. If I ever get there, I'm gonna take them up on their offer, which I think would be really cool. They spoke English. One of them was actually the Surgeon General of the People's Army of Vietnam. He was a 2-star general. I got my picture taken with them, and they were all about, you know, like 5'5", and you know they're sticking up in the middle. But yeah, we get along fine, and I think if you look at the history of the last 25 or 30 years, it really makes the war in Vietnam even a greater tragedy than sometimes we think it is. I think, one, I'm glad the war is over. Two, I'm sorry for the way it turned out. But when I look at it in retrospect, I think the end was almost inevitable. You know, it would have happened a lot sooner if we had not intervened. And I think our motives to stop communism, not just in Vietnam, but in many places around the world. Korea, you know, was another example of where we did it. We're in keeping with our desire that people shouldn't live under a totalitarian state. I still feel that way, but that's because, you know, I was raised here in America. The Vietnamese seem to have adapted themselves to this, like the Chinese have. And I'd submit that no matter what the government is in Vietnam, it's a whole lot better now than it was when I was there, you know, given the terror of the war and the uncertainty of the war and the death that was just an everyday occurrence. So not didn't end quite the way I wanted it to, but from my perspective as an American, and the fact that we have reestablished friendly relations with the Vietnamese, they are essentially an ally now against China. I think, as Voltaire said, this is the best of all possible worlds. My greatest memory of Vietnam wasn't in Vietnam. It was after I came home. And I was assigned to be the officer in charge of a burial detail. And we went to some small town in Pennsylvania up in the mountains. And we get up there with a 15-passenger van. I've got a squad of soldiers. I've got an NCOIC and me. And the casket is there, flag draped, when we arrive. And so we line up. The minister does the minister's thing. We fire a 21-gun salute. And then the soldiers in the NCOIC fold the flag, you know, very carefully, ceremonially. They bring it to me, and I take it, and I have a scripted comment to say to the family on behalf of the President of the United States and the Secretary of Defense, you know, and you give them the flag. And when I did, the mother jumped up and knocked the flag out of my hands and grabbed my uniform and said, "Why did my son have to die in that war?" And I just was shocked. And the husband got up and pried her off my uniform, and I picked the flag up off the ground and handed it to him and saluted, and we left. And I didn't have a good answer for her standing there that day. And 50 years later, I still don't have a good answer for her. All I can say was that along with the rest of us, he did his duty. And that is one of the highest callings you can have in my mind. And that is probably small comfort to that mother. But as a nation, if we get to the point where people don't accept that anymore, we're essentially done. So as hard a lesson as that is for people, if you're not willing to fight and die for this country, then you might as well just pack it in, because we're not going to last very long. Unfortunately, there are still men and women who are willing to do that every day. And we still have people that go in harm's way, pilots delivering that ordnance, men on ships in a storm, infantrymen wandering around in Afghanistan and Iraq. People are still willing to do that, and as long as we have those people, we'll do okay. But if it ever comes to the point where we don't, then we're not going to do very well as a nation.